Everyone knows the story of metals is a story of getting hotter. People learned to melt copper, then to alloy it into bronze, then to push the fire hotter still until iron ran liquid and poured. Each metal a rung on a ladder of heat. Master the fire, master the metal. That is how the story is usually told, and for gold, copper, bronze, and iron, it holds. There was one metal it did not hold for. It sat in the same river gravel as gold, in the same washed handfuls of grit, catching the same light. Gray, heavy, unremarkable to look at. And for the better part of 2,000 years, no furnace anywhere on earth could melt it. Not in Egypt, not in Rome, not in the workshops of Renaissance Europe, which could do almost anything with fire that a person of the time could imagine. Let me be careful with the word failed, because the honest version of this story turns on it. Humans did not entirely fail to work platinum. On one narrow stretch of the Pacific coast, people were shaping it into fine ornaments while Rome still stood. What defeated everyone, everywhere, for a very long time was one specific act: melting it, turning the solid gray grains into a pool of liquid you could pour into a mold. That is the thing that took roughly 2 millennia. And the first people to master platinum did it by never once melting it. Start with why melting matters so much. Most of what a smith does with metal begins with a melt. You liquefy the stuff, pour it into a shape, let it cool. Casting. It is how a bronze blade becomes a bronze blade and a bell becomes a bell. To melt a metal, you have to reach its melting point, the temperature where solid turns to liquid, and those temperatures climb steeply from one metal to the next. Gold turns liquid at around 1,064 degrees Celsius. Copper a little above that. Iron needs roughly 1,538. A good charcoal furnace, with bellows forcing air through the coals to drive the heat up, can, with real effort, reach iron. That was the ceiling of the ancient world's fire. Iron was the top of what anyone could pour. Platinum melts at about 1,170 degrees. It sits above iron. It sits above the top of the ladder. No bellows, no charcoal, no clever arrangement of the ancient or medieval world could climb that last step. The metal would not yield. Chemists later had a word for a substance that shrugs off heat like this: refractory. Platinum is among the most refractory metals there is, and it is stubborn in a second way as well. It barely reacts with anything. It does not rust, does not tarnish, does not dissolve in ordinary acids, does not corrode in air even when it is hot. Hold on to those two refusals: the refusal to melt and the refusal to react. They are the reason it was worthless for 2,000 years, and they are the reason it is precious now. So how did anyone work it at all? The answer sits on the coast where Ecuador and Colombia meet today, with a people archaeologists call the Tumaco la Tolita culture. Roughly from 300 BC to AD 500, they made objects of startling delicacy: masks the width of a thumb, nose ornaments, tiny beads with holes drilled through them. And some of these objects are made partly of platinum, the gray grains washed out of the very same rivers that gave them their gold. As far as the solid evidence goes, this narrow coast is the only place in the entire ancient world where anyone deliberately worked platinum. Everywhere else, it was ignored or never noticed at all. And when the Spanish conquest swept that coast, the tradition ended with it. The skill was never written down. Whatever those smiths knew about persuading platinum into shape went into the ground with them, and Europe, when it stumbled onto the same metal, would have to work the whole problem out again from nothing. They could not melt it. We are fairly sure of that, and not from guessing. The metallurgists, David Scott and Warwick Bray, studied these objects closely, and the microscopic structure of the metal itself carries the record. It was never heated anywhere near platinum's melting point. It never turned liquid. What the La Tolita smiths did instead was quietly ingenious. They took the platinum grains and mixed them with a little gold dust. Then they heated the mixture, not to melt the platinum, which was impossible, but to melt the gold, which was easy. The molten gold ran into the gaps between the platinum grains and cemented them together. They hammered the mass, reheated it, hammered again, folding and consolidating the two metals until they had a single dense material they could cut and shape and polish. That process has a name now: sintering, binding solid particles into one solid mass using heat that stays below the melting point of the main ingredient. The metal never pools. It fuses at the edges of the grains and is beaten into unity. A Danish engineer named Paul Bergso worked out the essentials of it in the 1930s, examining pre-Columbian pieces and reconstructing what the smiths must have done. I find his reconstruction convincing, and later microscopic work supports the shape of it. But I want to be honest about the edge of what is actually known here. A technique is being read off finished objects, centuries after the last person who practiced it died. Whether those smiths understood what was happening the way a modern metallurgist would, or simply held to a recipe that worked and passed it down, is not something the evidence can tell us. The objects survive. The reasoning inside the smith's head does not. Picture the workshop anyway. A low bed of charcoal on the coastal plain, a smith crouched over it with a hollow reed, blowing a thin, steady stream of air onto the coals to force the heat up at one small point, the way a modern jeweler uses a torch on a single spot. In front of them, a pinch of gray platinum grit and a pinch of gold. Slow, patient work. No mold, no pour, no river of bright liquid metal. Just heat and hammering, and the grains are slowly becoming a thing that holds together. This was happening around 2,000 years ago. It would be something like 14 centuries before anyone in Europe managed platinum at all. Now cross the world and jump forward. When Europeans finally met this metal, they hated it. They met it in roughly the same place the La Tolita smiths had generations later, the Chaco region of what is now Colombia, where Spanish colonists were washing gold out of the river gravels through the 1500s and 1600s. The gray grains kept turning up mixed in with the gold, and they were a nuisance. Too hard to break. They would not melt away. They fouled the delicate business of separating out pure gold, and there was no obvious use for them once separated. Imagine an Assyrian tipping his pan, the gold bright and heavy at the bottom, and those dull gray specks that would not wash out and would not melt down, sitting there as pure inconvenience. The Spanish called the stuff platina. It is not a grand name. It means little silver, and it carried a shrug of contempt in it, the diminutive you reach for when you mean a poor imitation of the real thing. In 1735, a young Spanish naval officer named Antonio de Ulloa traveled to South America as part of a French scientific expedition. He saw the platina in the Chaco, saw the trouble it caused the miners, and in 1748 he published an account of his journey that described it. He noted that some gold workings had been left abandoned because of how much difficulty the platina added to everything. That published description is generally taken as the moment platinum entered European science, though a few grains had already reached London through other hands a little earlier, and it was in England around 1750s that it was first argued to be a genuine new metal rather than a spoiled kind of silver. There was a darker edge to the nuisance. Platinum is almost exactly as dense as gold. Once it was cheap, plentiful, and unwanted, it made an excellent way to cheat. A counterfeiter could blend it into gold or bury a slug of it inside a coin or a bar, and the weight would still come out right on the scale. There is a widely repeated story that Spanish authorities, alarmed at this, ordered platina collected and dumped back into the rivers to keep it out of circulation. I have met that claim in a dozen places and could not chase it down to a solid contemporary source, so I will pass it along as the sort of thing that was said, not as a fact I can stand behind. What is not in doubt is the attitude underneath it. For a long stretch of its history, this was a metal people deliberately threw away. The reason nobody could simply melt it and put it to work was the same wall the ancient world had hit. The furnaces still could not get hot enough. Through the 1700s, European chemists chipped at the problem with chemistry instead of raw heat. A French chemist, Pierre-François Charbonneau, managed to produce a workable lump of platinum in 1783, though his results were maddeningly inconsistent because the ore was laced with other metals nobody had yet identified. Those other metals were real and hidden. Later work would pull a whole family out of platinum ore, osmium and iridium, palladium and rhodium, refractory cousins that had been riding along unseen the entire time. That was part of why early platinum behaved so unpredictably from one batch to the next. Chemists believed they were purifying a single metal and were in fact wrestling with five or six at once, each nearly as stubborn as platinum, several of them not identified until the early 1800s, when Wollaston and Smithson Tennant finally teased them apart from the leftover residue. The breakthrough that mattered most came from an Englishman named William Hyde Wollaston in the early 1800s, and here the story quietly folds back on itself. Wollaston built a fortune on platinum by making it malleable, by turning the impossible gray powder into solid metal you could hammer flat and draw into wire. He guarded his exact method as a trade secret for years, and his method was not melting. He dissolved the ore, precipitated the platinum out as a fine powder, then pressed and heated and hammered that powder, welding the hot particles into a dense, workable, solid mass. Read that again, and you may recognize it. Consolidating platinum powder into solid metal without ever melting it is, at its core, the same idea the La Tolita smiths had used, with gold standing in as their binder. Wollaston is rightly remembered today as a father of powder metallurgy. He was also, with no possible way of knowing it, rediscovering a solution that had been worked out on a South American coast something like 18 centuries before he was born. The same wall, the same way around it, found twice on two continents, more than 1,000 years apart, by people who never heard of each other. Once it could be worked, the verdict on platinum flipped hard. The same gray grit the Spanish had cursed became a metal a king might prize. It took a high polish and never tarnished, and its extreme density, the very thing that had made it perfect for fraud, now made counterfeiting the platinum itself nearly impossible. Spain took a keen interest, guarded its supply, and set the metal beside gold in fine and courtly work. A thing thrown in rivers suddenly wanted. Melting, the thing everyone had actually wanted all along, came last of all. In 1857, two French chemists, Henri Saint-Clair de Ville and Jules-Henri de Bray, finally did it at a useful scale. Their trick was not a better furnace of the old kind, but a different flame entirely. They burned hydrogen and oxygen together, an oxyhydrogen flame far hotter than any charcoal fire could ever be, and they directed it onto platinum sitting in a hollow carved from blocks of lime, a material that could take that heat without melting itself. Under the flame, the gray metal at last ran liquid and could be poured like any other. Picture that room in 1857. Not a forge this time, but a bench. A jet of pale flame roaring where the two gases met, a block of white lime scooped into a shallow cup, and in the cup a heap of gray platinum that had defeated every fire before this one. The flame bites in. The heap softens, slumps, and gathers itself into a single bright bead of liquid metal trembling in the lime. Two chemists standing over a thing no furnace in all of history had managed. Somewhere close to 2,000 years after a smith on the Pacific coast first coaxed platinum into an ornament, someone had finally melted it. So what does all of this actually tell us? Here's the part I keep turning over. Platinum never changed. It did not get easier across those 2,000 years. Its melting point in the Age of Rome was exactly its melting point in the workshop of de Ville and de Bray. Everything that shifted was on the human side of the fire, and it shifted in two completely different directions. The La Tolita smiths never beat the melting point. They looked at an impossible temperature and simply declined the contest, and they won anyway by binding the metal cold with a little gold. Europe, when its turn came, did both things one after the other. First, it rediscovered the powder trick in Wollaston's secret workshop. Then, decades later, it outmuscled the temperature itself with a hotter flame. And the deepest turn is about the metal's own character. The two properties that made platinum useless, that it would not melt and would not react, are the exact two properties that make it valuable now. Its stubbornness was never a flaw to be fixed. It was a use waiting for a world that needed it. Look at where the metal lives today. The single largest use of platinum is not jewelry and not coins. It is sitting in the exhaust systems of cars, inside the catalytic converter. A catalyst is a substance that speeds up a chemical reaction without being used up by it, without joining in and becoming something else. Platinum is superb at this precisely because it is so unreactive and so steady at high temperature. The converter uses it to turn poisonous exhaust gases into far less harmful ones. Reaction after reaction, while the platinum itself stays put and stays unchanged hour after hour, year after year. The refractory, inert, worthless grit that once clogged Spanish gold pans is now the quiet worker cleaning the air behind hundreds of millions of engines. That same resistance to heat and reaction is why platinum shows up in the fuel cells being built to run cars on hydrogen, doing the same patient catalytic job in a cleaner machine. It is scarce, and getting it is its own hard story. Nearly all of the world's platinum comes out of a handful of deep mines in South Africa and Russia, tons of rock hauled up and crushed for a few grams of metal, which is part of why a substance nobody wanted in 1700 now trades as a plain word for value. It reaches further than that. Platinum's refusal to change made it the thing the world was measured against. For over a century, the kilogram itself was a small cylinder of platinum and iridium, kept in a vault near Paris, chosen for the job precisely because it would not corrode or tarnish or drift until it was finally retired in 2019. A platinum compound sits at the heart of some of the most effective chemotherapy drugs ever made. The metal that no ancient fire could touch turned out to be exactly the metal you want when you need something that will not flinch, will not react, will not let you down. There is one more thread worth naming out loud, because it is genuinely uncertain and I would rather flag it than slip it past you. You will sometimes read that the ancient Egyptians used platinum, pointing to a trace of platinum group metal found in the decoration of one object from around 700 BC. The trace is real, but most specialists think it arrived by accident, a natural fleck of the metal riding along inside the gold rather than a material the Egyptians chose, recognized, and worked. Deliberate mastery of platinum, as far as the good evidence stretches, belongs to that one strip of the South American coast and to nowhere else in the ancient world. 2,000 years of fire could not melt a gray pebble out of a riverbed. The people who conquered it first did so without a furnace hot enough to touch it, by refusing to melt it at all. A small platinum ornament rests in a museum case in Quito, worked by hand before Rome fell. Outside in the car park, the same element idles in the exhaust of a parked car, scrubbing the air, taking the heat, unchanged by all of it, refusing, exactly as it always has, to change.